Why should you invest in an income first and growth second strategy? Well, stay tuned to this week's episode of the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. And welcome to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Sarah Samuels. And today we're talking about our all-time favorite topic, and we're going to include some new twists on why investing for income is something that you should strongly consider, and frankly, why now might be the best time in years to make that change.
Yep, there is a lot of opportunity right now, Dave. Yeah. And of course, it's great to be here with you and with all of our listeners. And how was your weekend, Dave? Did you have a nice weekend?
It was awesome. Well, you know what I did, of course. I was with we call it our Founders Club, which is some of our initial financial advisors that were with us maybe as much as 15 years ago or more in the early stages. And we go and do fun things every once in a while together. So, of course, we were at the Mecum Auto Auctions in Orlando this past weekend. And that's always a lot of fun. Yeah. It's just, it's good. In fact, it gets me to think of our topic today and why income's so important. I go to the auction, and no, by the way, nobody did buy a car this time, in case you're wondering.
I know every once in a while someone will get a wild hair and decide to buy a car at the auction.
Yeah, well, last year one of the guys, some of you listeners might remember the story. The way I like to tell the story is he scratched his nose and ended up buying a car by accident, which isn't too far from the truth. So no, I kept my hands in my pockets. But what amazed me about this was that there are a lot of cars that are going that are just overpriced that are ridiculous. But there are still some 1960s, 1970s muscle cars that are going at a reasonable price that you can buy 40, 50, 60,000, certainly under 100,000. Cars that men of my age or maybe a few years older would really want to have, right? We wanted those cars back then. We couldn't afford them. We want to have them today, right?
Right.
But the question becomes, why aren't average folks at those auctions buying those cars, right? Why is it just collectors, right? Because most of our listeners are not going to be collectors. That takes a lot of work and a lot of know-how. But even just something for fun. Well, the reason, in most cases, Sarah, is because people feel like, gosh, I saved all this money for retirement. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to be in, let's say, my 60s or late 50s, and I'm going to take money out of my investment accounts that I worked so hard to save and grow to buy this car, right?
That's scary.
They feel guilty. They feel like they shouldn't do it. But what they're missing is that if they invest for income, and if they can just take 1 or 2 years worth of excess income they don't need and use that to purchase the car, now they're not taking it out of principal. Now they're taking it out of income. It's a renewable resource. So again, I want to make that pitch to our listeners today. It's not just about guys that want to buy muscle cars. Ladies, for you too. If there's things like that you want to do but feel guilty about it, then today's show is going to help you really, hopefully, liberate you to have less guilt and to be able to do some of the things you want in a sensible way.
Yep. A lot of people have trouble with that psychology and with rewarding themselves because they are worried, Dave, about withdrawing principal, essentially spending their hard-earned savings to reward themselves. And that's scary in retirement. But investing for income gives you a world of different opportunities, like Dave just mentioned. So let's get into our Ask Dave question, because I think this is the foundation of it all. And a lot of our listeners out there, they have this question because sometimes it can be difficult to know. So we have Barbara from California, and she says, how do I know if I'm investing for income? What can I look for on my statement specifically?
Okay, Barbara, great question, and I can try to answer it depending upon where your money is invested and what your statement looks like. But it goes back to that equation we talk about all the time. Total return equals income plus growth. TR equals I plus G, right? So the income, comes in the form of either interest or dividends. Growth comes in the form of something that you buy at one price and hopefully it goes up in value. So think about a piece of real estate, right? You buy real estate, and let's say it's rental property. Well, now you make money on that in two ways. One is the income that's coming in, the rental income, and the other one is hopefully it goes up in value over time. And the same two components apply to virtually, I wouldn't say every investment, but to most investments. So So what you're looking for here is the renewable part, the interest and dividends, the income that's getting paid out. So if you have a brokerage account with, Edward Jones or Merrill Lynch or LPL or Morgan Stanley, you name it, then you should have a yield column on your statement. Now, some of these companies do have a yield column and some don't. If you have a yield column, that'll give you the percentage you're getting in income. And if you don't have that, then you go to the first page of the statement, typically the top, and it talks about the amount of income, interest and dividends paid year to date. And it'll talk about the amount of capital appreciation or depreciation. That's growth or shrinkage. So that's one of the best ways to find out if you have a brokerage account. Again, not all these accounts have a yield statement, but if you have an advisor, you can always call your advisor and say, what's my yield? What's my interest and dividend yield that I'm getting? If you have a 401k, well, then I got bad news for you. You're probably out of luck. I have yet to see a 401k that has an income column on its statement. And worst comes to worst, if you're not sure, give us a call, because we actually have a program where we'll put people's holdings into software, and based upon that, it'll pop out exactly how much income you're generating from those holdings.
Barbara, thank you so much for sending in your Ask Dave question. And if any of our listeners out there have a specific question you want to ask Dave, or if you want to utilize that software Dave just mentioned, all you have to do is send us an email at askdave@retirementincomesource.com. And you can always visit our website, retirementincomesource.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today's show is all about the things that income can make possible, especially when you're investing for income. So Dave was just talking a little bit earlier about the Meekum auto auction and how he went there with a group of our founding advisors that are part of Retirement Income Source, and how you mentioned, Dave, that a lot of the people there, the everyday people, right, not the collectors, most people were not actually buying cars. And I think it goes back to, again, that psychology. You've mentioned it with the Worth Avenue phenomenon, where wealthy people aren't shopping after Barry Madoff was arrested and that whole thing happened. I think people, especially in retirement, they battle this psychology, and how can they overcome it? How can they feel more comfortable spending the money to reward themselves?
Well, because it's different, a little different from the Bernie Madoff thing, because that has to do with when your net worth is shrinking, you don't want to spend. But most people's net worth has done well on paper over the last year or two, so they haven't really had that problem. But the problem becomes, hey, I want to. There's a limiting belief that says, well, that's being ostentatious. And I don't want to be ostentatious. I want to focus more on experiences, right? And
right. No one wants to say, "Oh, my dream is to own 5, extremely fancy supercars." Maybe that makes them look materialistic, right? People love to say, "Oh, I want an experience."
That's right.
Instead.
But it's all about how you get joy. Okay,
Yeah.
like for example, I remember a good friend of mine saying to me years ago, when I was being really cheap and tight with cars, because I thought it was ostentatious and I didn't want to send that image, being in the financial service industry. And he said, "Dave, you've got a boat. How often do you go out on it? Like once a month." He goes, "Okay, well, you drive your car every day. Don't you want to have a car that brings you joy?"
Yeah.
And I thought about that and I said, "Oh, okay, that's really a good point." And, what's interesting is, sometimes having something like a collector's car can be it's experiential. It's not about being materialistic, right? I mean, think about it. If you get once or twice a week to take your spouse out and to drive around town in it and enjoy it, or you get to take your grandkids out and they love being with grandpa in this old muscle car that's loud, that sounds cool. That's an experience. But unlike when you think of an experience like, gosh, I'm going to travel to Italy, well, now you got to wait. If you do it for 2 weeks, you got to wait 50 more weeks before you do it again, right? With this, having this is an experience that you can enjoy almost daily. And by the way, you still own an asset. Whereas the trip to Italy, what's left afterward are just receipts and a bunch of photos. So coming up, we're going to be talking a lot more about this. And again, how to be able to free your mind so that you can be guilt-free in retirement and do the things that you truly want to do. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today we're talking about ways you can overcome this guilt that you may have about spending your own hard-earned money. A lot of people struggle with this. They don't want to take a chunk out of their savings to spend it on something. They see it as, oh, I'm being too ostentatious, perhaps. I'm too materialistic, buying my dream car. But Dave, it's really not true, because this is something that will make you happy. And a lot of times, especially in the case of, buying a new car, that's an asset, and you're going to be using it every single day.
Yeah, it's right. The things that are experiential are really, you spend the money on the experience, it's gone. You got the photos, you have the memories, and that's it. And then, how often are you going to do that? Even if you have planned out a nice retirement, if you're doing 2-week vacations with the whole family to some fancy place, maybe it's once a quarter, right? So you experience it for a week or two, and then you got 12 weeks in between where you don't. And again, that's a pure expense. But if you have something that's an asset, like let's take the car, right? And you can buy that out of cash flow because you have more income than you need. See, that's important. Just like a car, yeah, you want to put your foot to the pedal sometimes and see how fast it can go, but you don't want to drive around at maximum speed. In fact, if you do that, and I've done that once, by the way, I had some of you might remember the old Mercedes 190D, 190 diesel. It went 0 to 60 in about an hour and a half. It was really slow. Max speed was 92 miles an hour. So I bought this car in my 20s because I thought it was responsible, and being in the financial field, it was a good business car, right? So I decided to drive from Connecticut to Florida, and it was accelerated so slowly that my challenge was to peg it to 92 miles an hour and to just keep going 92 the whole way down when I'm not in traffic, right? Well, of course, I learned my lesson. I got the thing back to Connecticut, and within a week, I blew the engine.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, redlining it the whole way. And how long of a drive? How many miles is that, Dave?
It was a lot, probably 3,000 round trip.
3,000.
But I thought diesel engines were indestructible, right? I didn't realize you can over-rev them, right? But so it's okay to max it out and see how fast it can go, but then you want to take your foot off the pedal a little bit. And the same is true with investing for income. So you want to see how much income you can get. And some years you might even spend all of your income, but generally speaking, you don't want to spend it all. You want to leave some of that income in reserve to accrue so that you can do special things at certain times, or as an inflation hedge for the future, or for lump sum expenses that you might not be counting on.
Right.
So, think about it. If you have I'll use round numbers. You have 50,000 of income, and you only need 30,000 from investments because you have pension and Social Security to supplement that. So now you have an extra 20,000 a year. Well, after 3 years, potentially you've saved enough to go out and pay $60,000 on that muscle car. Right. And unlike paying on experience, you actually you can experience it every day, not just once a quarter or once a year. But like I said, you also have that asset. As you said, you have the asset. It's worth something. And if you get tired of it, you trade it and you do something else. But again, it doesn't just apply to that too. It applies to other things that you might want.
Right, exactly. Things like maybe redoing your home. Maybe you've wanted a new kitchen. That's $60,000. You can redo your kitchen, and you don't have to worry about taking it out of principal. So let's get into our next Ask Dave question, which has to do with, of course, income. So we have John from Tennessee. He says, I'm not sure how much income I can actually get from my portfolio. Can you explain?
All righty, John. Sure. I would say that, well, first of all, let me answer it this way. You probably heard me say before, if you're a regular listener, that, in the bowels of the interest rate environment 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years ago, we were getting our clients 4% net of investment fees. That means, John, if you had $1 million, literally $40,000 a year would be the income that you can generate. Now we're in the 5 to 6 range, depending upon how much risk that you want to take. So that's a reasonable range. Now, can you get more? Sure. There's certain asset classes where you might be able to get 10%. For example, if you went into BDCs, business development companies, or you went into MLPs, master limited partnerships, you might be able to get 8 to 12%. But those are riskier assets. Those are riskier assets where the income can go down. The dollar amount fluctuates, the principal even more. So you want to be careful. But I like to say in a reasonable portfolio right now, 5 to 6% is what you can get. You should be able to get net of fees. Now, and if you're sharp enough, you're doing it yourself, and you're a good, knowledgeable investor, then maybe you can add 1% on that and get a little bit more because you're not paying a fee. All right. But again, I'm not talking about bank CDs because, John, I want to make one thing clear. In bank CDs today, you can get 5% or a little bit more, but notice they're all short term. Long-term bank CDs are a whole different story. You're getting lower yields. And remember, retirement is a financial liability, but it's not a short-term liability. God willing, it's a long-term liability. That means you want to fund it with a longer-term asset and lock into longer-term interest rates, not just short-term. And so those numbers I gave you are pretty solid right now.
Well, John, thank you so much for sending in your question. And if any of our listeners or our YouTube viewers out there have a retirement question that you would like to ask Dave, all you need to do is send us a message. Just email us at askdave@retirementincomesource. That's SOURCE.com. And thank you for listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton. And if you're one of those people who feels guilty when you make a big expense and you're worrying about how you're going to be able to maybe pay for things in retirement even, and you're worried about feeling that guilt in retirement, our show is for you, because today we're talking about how investing for income allows you to free yourself of that guilt. And there's ways that if you invest for income, if you organically grow your portfolio by not taking all of your income out of it, you can afford that brand new kitchen you've always wanted, or maybe that muscle car you always dreamed about driving.
Yeah, yeah. And it's it's interesting. We have one of our advisors whom you know is he loves cars, and he buys a new car every year. So he's the opposite of me, right? I drive a car for 10 or 15 years. He switches them out pretty much every year, but he oftentimes doesn't lose money, and he buys cars that are over $100,000. Of course, he's on a financial advisor's income, but it doesn't cost him a lot because he made the investment up front. Maybe periodically he'd add 10 or 20,000 to it and upgrade. But recently drove a car for an entire year because he bought it right, drove it for a year, sold it, and got all of his money back. So even that type of thing, if you don't want a collector's car, a lot of people retire and say, well, I'm going to buy my final car and I'm going to keep it for 20 years. Well, that's okay. But if cars are a thing for you, maybe now you have a little more time on your hands. Maybe you can look to get a good deal and buy it right, drive it for a year, sell it. You don't lose anything. And if you lose 10 grand, well, great. If you have an extra 10,000 of income that you don't need, well, then you can add it to that. So basically, you're going to incur the depreciation one way or another. So that's just a great example of something you can do and enjoy your money. Retirement doesn't need to be punishment. It doesn't need to be something where you're sitting there and counting your pennies and clipping coupons.
We don't want it to be. We want you to enjoy your retirement, to have a great 30 years or more of retirement, not to live in this fear that you're going to run out of money.
It should be the reward. That's right. And that's why even we talk about, like you said, doing work around the house. Okay. Great example. You're retired. You're home more often, right? So to me, it's a great time to say, okay, what can I do with that extra income? Can I do little projects to make my house a little bit nicer, a little bit homier, the way I want it? But again, if you're taking money out of your investment lump sum, out of your base, you're not going to want to do that. But if you're taking it out of renewable income, interest and dividends, that are going to be there next year and the year after and the year after that, then go ahead, do these projects. Because again, if you're home more, that's an experience. That's not being ostentatious. That's truly enjoying that daily experience even more because you have more time on your hands than you did when you're working.
Right. And you get to enjoy it, like you said, every single day. Or if it's a fancy car, you get to enjoy it maybe a couple times a week. And that's a whole different story than just experiencing stuff, just going out and doing new things. That you actually get to enjoy this item. And for certain people, a lot of people, it's musical instruments. My father loves guitars. I don't even know how many guitars he has at this point. 56, a lot of guitars.
He's a collector in that case.
He's a collector. Yeah, he loves them. But that's really the only thing that he likes to spend money on. He still drives the same car the last 25 years now. That's the one thing he wants to spend his money on, which makes sense. And you can do that, right? Like Dave's story. You don't redline the car. They'll 3,000 miles round trip to Connecticut, right? But if you redline it every once in a while, you can still have fun and get enjoyment out of it without wrecking the car. Yeah,
you don't want to spend the maximum income each year because you also want an inflation hedge and you get unexpected expenses. You need a new roof on your house. You need a transmission in your car. You want to have some extra cash flow to be able to do that. But if a few years goes by and you're not using it and it's just piling up, well, now you could take that and use it for something like we just discussed. And like I said, even your house, not only does it give you more pleasure, but guess what? Now all of a sudden, the grandkids might want to come and visit you more often because they like being there. It's homier. It's cooler for them too.
It's nicer, more upgraded. Absolutely. Well, you might be thinking, hey, I'm interested. I want to take this income and use it for something, but how is this going to affect my taxes? Because I do not want to pay a large tax bill. Well, if so, you're not alone. We're going to answer that question in our next Ask Dave segment. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton, and today we're talking about investing for income and all the different opportunities it provides you. And how, if you invest for income, you can really release that guilt you might feel about making a big purchase on something, because that money is not coming out of your principal, it's coming out of the income that you're earning.
Yeah, it's I hate to make this all about cars, but I'm just hot off this Mecum auction with 4,000
cars on the brain.
4,000 cars being auctioned off, and it's pretty cool. If you've never been to one of those auctions and you're at all a car buff, you probably want to go just as a spectator. You don't even need to get permission to bid. In fact, you might not want to the first couple times you go, but it's just fun. But it reminds me of a client, one of our advisors I was visiting in Louisiana, and one of his clients who was a car buff, and he had several $1 million. I've told the story before on this show, and he had income coming from several $1 million of rental property, and he had a few $1 million in his portfolio. And so I asked him, when I found out he was a car buff, I said, "What kind of collector's cars do you have?" And he didn't have any. And I said to him, I said, let me guess. You go home and you say to your wife, "Honey, I'm going to take $50,000 or $100,000 out of savings. And I'm going to go buy this 50-year-old car." That conversation, how's that going to go over? And he starts laughing. He goes, "Yeah, that's the problem. It's not responsible." And I said, "Okay, well, how would this sound instead?" You go home and say, "Sweetie, look, our portfolio can generate as much as $150,000 of income. I want to take half of this year's income, just 6 months, and I want to go and buy a car. And by the way, the car might actually go up in value. Then next year, we can take half of that income. We can do something fun that you want to do. How's that sound?"
It's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, and I said to him, "Is that a better conversation?" His face lit up, because that's the guilt. So it's whether it's your guilt or whether it's the guilt of trying to explain to your spouse how this is responsible use of money, and it's not. That goes out the window when it's a renewable resource. Right? You've heard my heating analogy before.
Well, we talked about this before, right?
Yeah. If you had to heat your house in the winter, not here in Florida, obviously somewhere else, but
where it's cold,
by only burning the wood from the trees that are on your property, you'd be pretty cautious because you don't know how long you're to live. You don't know if some of the trees are going to die. You don't know how fast they're going to grow. You do some calculations, but you have to be really cautious. But if all of a sudden you were heating your house with solar or wind, a renewable resource, you'd crank the heat up to whatever temperature you wanted because you knew that tomorrow there's going to be more of it and the day after there's going to be even more. And by the way, if there's more power than you need from the solar or the wind, then maybe you could sell some of it back to the utility company or send some of it over to your neighbor and sell it to him or her. So the point is that renewable resources give you freedom to do things that you don't have if you're dealing with a finite resource. And that's the beauty of investing for interest and dividends and income in retirement. It's liberating.
Yep. It's a great analogy, Dave. But a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, if I'm taking income out, I'm sure it's going to affect my taxes. So let's answer this next question we have from Cheryl, actually in Louisiana, funnily enough. She says, if I max out my income, I'm taking income, but I'm not spending it all, how does that affect my taxes?
All right, Cheryl. I wonder if I never met the wife. I just met the husband in that particular time. So I wonder if this could be Cheryl. This could be the other half of that couple. So who knows? I'd have to answer this carefully. All right, Cheryl, here we go. It depends. And if you have non-IRA money that's just sitting there, sure, interest and dividends will increase your taxable income. But you have to ask yourself, what's my goal? What's my goal? Is it to pay the least amount of taxes and to shortchange the government? Or is my goal to get the most income after tax in my pocket so I can enjoy it? So you have to put it in perspective. Is it a scarcity goal, just shortchanging the government, or an abundance goal that you have the most left over? Because if you ever want to spend this money, you're going to have to pay taxes on it, right? So that's my answer if it's non-IRA money. But I will tell you that in my experience, 70% of our listeners' money is in 401ks, IRAs, 403bs, Roth IRAs, tax-sheltered investments. So Cheryl, if you're like most of them, where you have a chunk of your money in those tax-sheltered investments, then the taxes don't matter at all. Here's why. Just because you're earning, let's say $50,000 a year of interest and dividends from your portfolio, doesn't mean you need to withdraw the whole $50,000 if you're not going to use it. You only pay taxes on what you withdraw if it's IRAs and 401ks and Roth IRAs. And Roth IRAs are tax-free anyway. So you can earn extra interest and dividends. You can accumulate in those accounts what you don't need and therefore not pay taxes on it until you actually need it. So no matter whether it's IRA money or non-IRA money, again, don't let the tax tail wag the investment dog. Stay focused on doing what you need to do for you so you can have the most net after taxes for you and for your family. That should be the ultimate goal.
Abundance versus scarcity. Cheryl, thank you so much for sending in your Ask Dave question. And if any of our listeners out there have a question about your retirement or maybe the investing for income financial strategy, all you have to do is email us at askdave@retirementincomesource.com, and you might hear your question answered on a future show. Thank you for listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and we're talking about investing for income, of course, and really how it opens so many doors for people to pursue their dreams and their goals in retirement, whether it's owning that sports car you dreamed of, maybe it's upgrading your kitchen, changing up your house. But there's a lot of different ways that you can actually use income. And a lot of people, and get rid of that guilt people feel too.
Or just reinvesting it. Let's say in Cheryl's case, let's say, round numbers, and I know a lot of you listeners may not have $1 million. I use it because it's a round number. Let's say you have $1 million, you're generating $50,000 a year. Cheryl takes out 30, pays taxes on it. What do you do with the other 20? Well, she can reinvest it and essentially, buy more assets that generate even more income the following year. Or she can take it out, pay taxes on it, and put it in a Roth IRA. So you rip the Band-Aid off, you pay taxes once, and then any future growth on that will be tax-free, right? So there's lots of things that she can do with that. Or if she's really, if Cheryl's really motivated to leave a good legacy for her children or grandchildren, and she's in good health, she could buy a life insurance policy and take that $20,000 and buy life insurance with it to leverage the estate. That's how some people overcome guilt, by the way. It's kind of funny because you remember when you had young children, you'd have to give them a permission slip to miss gym class because they were sick, right? Well, some people feel like, well, I need to leave this money intact because of my kids. I want to leave it for them. I feel guilty spending it. Well, and a lot of people don't. And if you don't, well, then you're already liberated from that. That's great. But if you do, then a great way to do that is the life insurance strategy, because it essentially is a permission slip from your children to spend down your money over time, because if you spend down your money, then they'll have the life insurance when all is said and done. So again, even that works to a certain degree.
Yep. And that could be a good opportunity, too, for those of our listeners. Maybe they don't have children, they don't have a legacy they want to leave behind, but they are worried about rising medical expenses in the future, because we talk about this all the time, how healthcare inflation actually rises a lot faster than the rate of regular inflation. So that's also an opportunity, too, with that. And investing for income, of course, helps with this as well, because you're able to spend the interest and dividends. You're able to spend that money you're making as opposed to spending your principal.
That's
and then worst case scenario, right, Dave, at the end of the line, your late 90s, maybe your late 80s, you can actually spend down some of your principal if you need to for healthcare.
When you get to a more advanced age, that's right. Yep. And the other thing, too, is charitable bequest. If that's what makes you feel good doing great things for others, then that extra, most people don't want to do huge charitable bequests because of what you said. What if I take sick? What if I need it, right? But if it's coming out of the renewable resource, coming out of the income, you can do that, okay? And if you're like Cheryl, where you're concerned about taxes, you can do a QCD. Right, qualified charitable distribution, where you take that extra $20,000 out and send it directly from the IRA to the charity, and it's tax-free, right? Because you get the deduction essentially to wipe out the taxes. So again, even if you want to do something like that, that's good for others, it's money that can be used for someone's benefit somewhere. Because I feel like without that, you don't have to necessarily give up growth either. And I think I want to talk about that a little bit more, maybe in the next segment of the show, but we don't need to give up growth either. And people think that's a limiting belief. Well, to have more income, I have to give up growth. And that's not necessarily true. But to invest for growth without income is almost like having slothful money. It's almost a sin. It's almost, like it's money that's sitting there that could be doing some good for somebody by generating income,
Yeah.
and it's not.
Put it
It's
to
just
work.
sitting there, you're crossing your fingers and toes, hoping there's a bull market and it's going to go up, when you don't really have to sacrifice growth to get that extra income. You may not be able to get that 5 or 6% or 7% I talked about, but still you could probably get more income than you're getting today from most portfolios.
Yeah. Well, we're going to cover that and why you don't have to necessarily sacrifice growth for income. Plus, Dave, I think we should talk about maybe a few other income myths floating around out there just to dispel those for our listeners. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
And welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels. And today we're talking about how you can liberate yourself from the guilt. Call it Catholic guilt, call it Jewish guilt, whatever. It could be non-denominational guilt, but how to liberate yourself from the guilt of spending money in retirement. So far we talked about how income is a renewable resource, and how whether your passion is having a 1960s or 70s muscle car, it's always easier to buy it if you spend it out of income, interest and dividends, renewable resource, and don't take it out of your principal, out of your savings. Same thing for doing projects around the house, right? To make that home more enjoyable, because at the end of the day, in retirement, you have more time on your hands, and you spend more time in your house, more time in your car, more time doing things like that. And even taxes. We talked about taxes a little bit too, Sarah, which I think are important.
Absolutely. Well, the thing with income, Dave, is it provides so many opportunities, but there are also a lot of different myths surrounding income. And one of those myths is that you have to sacrifice growth if you want to get income. Can you explain why that's not necessarily true?
Well, when you talk about income, you typically bonds and preferred stocks. And I even mentioned how BDCs and master limited partnerships can get higher rates of income, but they have more risk. You don't expect a lot of growth in those investments as a general rule, although BDCs did very well last year. But you could still get income, maybe not quite to that level, in common stocks, right? We have a stock strategy that, we've averaged a 4.5% dividend yield, and still have growth potential, where essentially we've, in most years, beaten the S&P 500. Done as well, if not better, than the stock market, with a competitive dividend yield. And even if you have a manager who's charging a 1% management fee, which is standard, you're netting 3.5%. So if you don't need a ton of income, if you have enough assets, you've been a good saver, maybe you have a pension or Social Security, and you still want to get some growth in the traditional sense, some capital appreciation, then you can do it and stay in the stock market. But to me, to own stocks that don't pay a dividend yield is like having money lying fallow. It's sitting there, and you're just
It's not doing anything
you're
for you.
speculating on the future. Yeah. It's not doing anything for you now. And if you end up in a period like the 2000 to 2012 period, 13 years where the market was underwater, now you're retired. That's nothing.
Yeah.
You're getting nothing out of that except sitting there twiddling your thumbs, waiting for it to come back. And if you're 65 years old, that means you're 78 years old by the time it comes back. And that could be all of what we call your go-go years in retirement. By the time your investments come back to where they were the day you retired at age 65, you don't want to do the things that you wanted to do 13 years earlier when you first retired. And that's why that income is what saves the day for those investors. Those investors who were in higher dividend stocks back then, yeah, they might have been underwater for 13 years, but if they were getting a 4% dividend paid out to them, that was money they can use to enjoy those early years of retirement.
Right. That's that integral part of the income we talk about, right? That money that's actually paying the bills in retirement that you need, because you can't sell growth. But here's another myth that I want to get into, Dave, and actually comes from our Ask Dave question. So we have Kate in Washington, and she says, how about annuities to get income?
All right, Kate. Well, you've heard me say, if you're a regular listener, that annuities like the good, the bad, and the ugly sometimes in the financial service world. Some people love them. Some people hate them. And the reality is, like anything else, the truth lies in the middle, right? There are niches for annuities. But one thing you need to be aware of with most annuities is most annuities don't necessarily generate income. They generate cash flow, part of which might be interest or income, but part of which might be return of principal, because the idea of an annuity is to guarantee you income for life, okay? And it used to be that nothing would be remaining when you died, that they guarantee it for life, and if you lived to be 100, you made out. If you live 5 years after you bought the annuity, well, then the insurance company had a windfall. Well, now there's some annuities where you can still have some money left over for your heirs at the end. But usually when you're taking income from an annuity, some of that's coming from interest, some of it's coming from principal. So, Kate, I don't want you to conflate income with cash flow, because there's really three types of income. One is interest and dividends. Two is what the IRS considers taxable income. And three is cash flow, what's being sent to you. And today we're talking about the first definition, true interest and dividends, true economic income. Not what the government happens to say is taxable, because you can get income that's reinvested in your IRA or Roth IRA, and the government doesn't consider that to be income, but economically it is. And annuities, again, it's cash flow. Some might be interest, but some of it is return of your principal. How can the insurance company do that? Well, they have the law of large numbers to work with. They know some of you might live past life expectancy, some might not make it to life expectancy, and on average, they're going to be okay. So just be careful with annuities and understand that some of the money you're getting or going to get in the future every month might be return of principal. So it's kind of like the opposite, Sarah, of the growth strategy, a stock strategy that pays dividends, where it goes up in value. In most cases, the annuities pay income, but you're actually depleting principal. It's going the other way.
Yeah, well, Kate, make sure you're on the lookout for that and be careful of that. And thank you, of course, for sending in your retirement question, your question about annuities. If any of our listeners or our YouTube viewers out there have a question that you would like to ask Dave, all you have to do is send us an email at askdave@Retirement Income Source. That's SOURCE.com. And thank you so much for spending your time here and spending your weekend here with us on Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton. And today's show has mostly been about the biggest theme, I think, is opportunity, and how when you invest for income, when you get those interest and dividends, how you can have all of these different opportunities, whether it's purchasing an item, maybe it's investing in an experience, maybe it's leaving a legacy, or setting up a charitable donation.
That's right.
Or maybe you want to make sure that you have medical money to pay for medical expenses later in life. But there is opportunity here, and I think that's what I want our viewers and our listeners really to understand about income.
It gives you choices. The income gives you choices. Like I said, even if you were getting a 4% dividend yield on stocks from 2000 to 2012, and your portfolio was underwater, you still had cash flow coming in. If you had $1 million portfolio, you had $40,000 a year coming in, which would give you a choice. Do I reinvest it because the market's down, I could buy more shares, or do I take it and spend it? And to me, the more choices you have in life, the more enjoyable life is, right? It's like when you go to work. You go to work because you have to pay the bills. It can be cumbersome. But if you go to work because you want to, you have enough money saved to retire, but you're going to work out of choice, it makes it more fun. And think about it this way, right? Okay, you and Justin go on vacation now, right? Do you take that money out of savings, or do you take it out of income?
Savings, or save enough to make sure we can pay for the expenses. But yeah, I would say it probably comes out of
well, like the
savings.
old days, they used to have the vacation club, and
Right,
they
the
and they had
jar, right?
the Christmas club at banks where you would take payroll deduct.
Yeah.
But still, that was out of income. It was just a disciplined way to put it away for 12 months and then spend it. But it came out of that year's income. It didn't come out of investments as a general rule, right?
Right.
Even cars, right? If you buy a car, what do people do? They get a car payment, right? And it comes out of income. Or if you do it like my client, the show 2 weeks ago, I talked about my Middle Eastern client, Iraj, the lesson I got in the late 80s from him. What he did, he would take it out of cash flow and save it for 3 or 5 years and then go pay cash for a car. But it's still coming out of his income. So yeah, maybe it's coming out of the savings account, but that savings account came out of income and it was there temporarily for a purchase. So, that's what I want all of you to understand today in listening to this show, is that if you've paid expenses your entire working career out of income, why should that change in retirement? The answer? Really shouldn't.
Right. And we want all of our listeners, of course, to live a retirement of abundancy. We don't want them to live in scarcity. And part of those choices that Dave mentioned makes that possible, because when you're not worried about running out of money, when you can feel guilt-free about purchasing that car or taking that vacation or spending that money that previously it made you feel guilty to spend, you're really living a more abundant retirement, and you can enjoy yourself, which is the most important part.
Yeah, and I've gone through that too as a business owner. There's, everybody thinks being a business owner is so cool, but I have to tell you, there are plenty of years as a business owner where the business owner doesn't get paid, right? Everyone else gets paid, the business owner doesn't get paid. And we've had different years where I have not taken a paycheck and I paid my bills out of savings. And I will tell you, it sucks.
Yeah,
I don't know
it's
how
tough.
else to say it. It really sucks. And then you're scrimping and you're saving, and it's just not fun. But if all of a sudden you get that paycheck and it has, you've controlled your expenses so you have a little bit left over from that paycheck after you pay your bills, it's nice. It's like, oh, what do I want to do with this little bit of extra money? Do I want to save it? Do I want to go on a trip? It gives you choices and it feels good. And for some of you, maybe you can relate that. Maybe you had a time in your life when cash flow was really tight and you could barely pay the bills or not even pay the bills. Maybe you're between jobs and it was terrible. But then you had times where your income was greater than your expenses and that felt liberating.
Yep. And when that's happening, you want to make sure you're putting that money away for the winter, right? For the dry period where that cash flow might dry up. Make sure you're saving.
Some of it, but you can enjoy some of it too.
Of course.
And you know what? That same psychology does not change at all when you're retired.
Well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Retirement Income Source. And if you would like to listen to this episode again or maybe send it to some of your friends, all you have to do is go to retirementincomesourceradio.com.
And we certainly hope you join us right here next week, same time, same station. And please share your stories of the fun things that you've done with your cash flow during retirement. We want to hear them.
Absolutely.
I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.